The Tel Aviv skyline is no longer illuminated by the familiar reassuring bursts of Iron Dome interceptors. Instead, the terrifying shriek of hypersonic warheads ripping through the atmosphere at 15 times the speed of sound has become the new grim reality. We are witnessing a catastrophic turning point in modern military history as the world's most vaunted air defense network has officially exhausted its ammunition reserves after 5 grueling hours of relentless bombardment. In direct response to the recent American threats and the precision strikes on sovereign Iranian command centers, Tehran has unleashed a synchronized wave of hypersonic ballistic missiles. Each of these projectiles carries over 1 ton of high explosives, precision engineered to strike military nerve centers across central Israel. This is not a mere exchange of fire. It is a clinical, high-speed saturation campaign designed to shatter the very concept of preemptive defense. Intelligence reports indicate that more than 200 Fatu missiles have successfully bypassed the defensive layers, reducing hardened air bases and intelligence hubs to smoldering craters. The collapse of the defensive umbrella followed a strategic exhaustion of the Tamir interceptor stockpiles, which were bled dry by thousands of low-cost, suicide drones and sophisticated decoys. Israeli defense officials have been forced to admit a devastating truth. The industrial rate of production can not possibly compete with the rate of consumption in a total war scenario. Each interceptor missile costs between $40,000 and $150,000, while the adversary spends only a fraction of that on mass-produced drones. This economic and logistical chasm has created a void that even the massive military-industrial complex of the United States cannot fill in real time. As the final interceptor spiraled into the night sky at 3 in the morning, a lethal silence fell over the battery sites, leaving millions of civilians and strategic assets completely exposed to the incoming fire. The Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps has labeled this operation a direct retaliation for the loss of their supreme leadership. These hypersonic threats, capable of erratic maneuvering in their terminal phase, have rendered early warning radars nearly obsolete. The strategic balance in the Middle East has shifted in a matter of hours, moving from a stalemate to a state of absolute vulnerability as the once impenetrable shield finally shattered under the weight of sheer numbers. The logistical failure currently paralyzing the regional defense infrastructure is not just a matter of military strategy. It is a brutal lesson in the economics of modern attrition. For decades, the narrative of invincibility was built upon the success of the Iron Dome, David's Sling, and the Arrow systems. However, the 5-hour hypersonic barrage has exposed a fatal flaw: the asymmetry of cost. While a single Fatu missile or a swarm of Shaite 136 drones costs the Iranian regime a mere fraction of a standard yearly military budget, the cost for Israel to neutralize these threats has soared into the billions of dollars in a single evening. At $150,000 per Tamir interceptor, the mathematics of survival have become unsustainable. Sources within the Pentagon suggest that the rapid depletion of these stocks has created an emergency logistical bottleneck that cannot be resolved by standard airlift operations. The sheer volume of fire, thousands of projectiles launched in waves, was designed specifically to trigger this exact moment of exhaustion. Now, as the smoke clears over the Negev desert and the outskirts of Tel Aviv, the strategic landscape looks fundamentally different. Without the protective canopy of the Iron Dome, the civilian population is now a direct variable in the military equation. This is no longer a localized conflict. It is a systemic failure of Western-style missile defense against next-generation Eastern technology. The failure of the defense systems to account for hypersonic speeds, velocities that exceed 5 miles per second, means that the reaction window for command and control has shrunk to near zero. Decision-makers in Washington are now facing an agonizing choice: to continue funneling billions into a defense system that has proven penetrable, or to escalate into a full-scale offensive to stop the launches at their source. The latter carries the risk of a third world war, while the former guarantees the slow, grinding destruction of their primary regional ally. Experts point out that the trade routes through the Strait of Hormuz and the Red Sea are already feeling the shockwaves, with global oil prices surging by 30% in less than 24 hours. The economic fallout is just beginning to ripple through international markets. As investors realize that the era of secure airspace in the Middle East has ended, the world is watching a superpower's defensive doctrine crumble in real time, replaced by the chaotic, unpredictable reality of hypersonic warfare. The 50-second lightning strike that was supposed to decapitate the Iranian leadership has instead ignited a regional wildfire that Washington can no longer contain. Military analysts are now dissecting the failure of the precision strike on the secret underground command complex in Tehran, which reportedly killed several high-ranking commanders, but failed to disrupt the decentralized retaliatory protocols of the Iranian Revolutionary Guard. This strike, which lasted less than 1 minute, was intended to change the strategic balance in favor of the West. But it only served to validate Iran's deepest fears and trigger their most aggressive response protocols. As a direct result, the major urban centers like Tel Aviv and Haifa have been transformed into ghost cities. The streets are empty, the businesses are shuttered, and the silence is only broken by the roar of incoming hypersonic missiles that have now found their mark. Brutal censorship is currently being applied to reporting from these areas to prevent a total collapse of public morale. Yet the reality on the ground is undeniable. The once vaunted invincibility of the state has been pierced by the sheer weight of Iranian engineering, while the world's attention is fixed on the spectacular failure of the Iron Dome. The political theater in the United States is taking a dark and familiar turn. This sudden escalation has kick-started what many are calling a reunion tour of dreaded war figures from the past, echoing the disastrous miscalculations of the Afghanistan and Iraq eras. Figures within the political establishment are already appearing on national television, openly advocating for a mass murder campaign within Iran and promising to blow the hell out of the population in the coming weeks. This rhetoric reflects a desperate administration that realizes its masterstroke has turned into the biggest mistake of the 2026 military campaign. They thought this would be a quick victory, a regime change similar to previous regional interventions. But they are finding themselves bogged down in a conflict that mirrors a 20-year nightmare. The United States missions in Riyadh and Kuwait have already been attacked and closed, with nationals told to flee a region where every exit strategy has vanished. The calculation was fundamentally wrong. The execution was strategically flawed. And now the entire Middle East is burning with no fire breaks in sight. For days into this relentless conflict, the Middle East has been transformed into a massive furnace of high-tech destruction, where the distinction between military and civilian infrastructure is rapidly vanishing. While Washington continues to frame the invasion as a liberation mission, reports from the ground in Tehran paint a much darker picture of systematic carpet bombing. The narrative of bringing democracy through precision strikes has been shattered by the reality of widespread devastation in densely populated urban centers. One of the most harrowing reports currently being verified involves a girls' school in the southern city of Minab, where state media claims dozens of children were killed during a midnight air raid. Although the Pentagon insists that it never deliberately targets non-combatants, the sheer scale of the ordnance being dropped makes collateral damage an inevitable and terrifying constant. This is the paradox of the 2026 campaign. A war marketed as a surgical removal of a regime has evolved into a total assault on the fabric of a nation, in a direct appeal that has been criticized as both desperate and delusional. President Trump recently addressed the Iranian people, telling them that the hour of their freedom is at hand. He urged the population to stay sheltered and wait for the bombs to stop before taking over their own government, claiming this would be their only chance for generations to achieve true sovereignty. However, this message of hope is being delivered via the same airwaves that carry the sounds of incoming B-52 bombers. The irony is not lost on international observers who point out that you cannot liberate a people by destroying the cities they live in. Meanwhile, the human cost on the other side of the border is equally staggering. In Israel, the failure of the defense shield has led to a mass exodus from the cities. Tel Aviv, once the vibrant heart of the Mediterranean, has become a silent maze of concrete and fear. Every civilian knows that if the VMST remains empty, there is no barrier between them and the next wave of Fatah missiles. The strategic miscalculation regarding the resilience of the Iranian public is becoming the defining failure of this administration. Instead of a popular uprising against the Ayatollahs, the external threat has, in many sectors, triggered a nationalist rally around the flag. This is the same pattern witnessed in Afghanistan and Iraq, yet the lessons of those 20-year nightmares seem to have been completely ignored by the current military planners. The situation is changing so rapidly that even the most seasoned analysts are struggling to keep pace. As the fifth day of the war approaches, the humanitarian corridor remains non-existent, and the U.S. missions in the surrounding Gulf states remain shuttered, leaving thousands of foreign nationals stranded in a combat zone that has no clear borders and no foreseeable end. As the conflict enters its second week, the specter of past military failures looms large over the corridors of power in Washington. The decision to initiate what many international legal experts are now labeling an illegal invasion has not only destabilized the Iranian plateau, but has also activated a lethal network of regional proxies that have been preparing for this exact moment for decades. We are currently witnessing a massive, coordinated mobilization of Hezbollah in the north and the remnants of Hamas in the south, both of which continue to be armed and equipped by Tehran, despite the most aggressive naval blockades in history. This is the realization of the absolute worst-case scenario for Western strategic planners. A multi-front war that stretches from the Mediterranean Sea to the heart of the Persian Gulf. The once-contained shadow war has exploded into a visible, high-intensity struggle for regional survival, reflecting on the bloody history of American involvement in the Middle East. Veteran intelligence officers are now pointing to the grim statistics from the Iraq occupation as a warning for the current campaign. During those years of unconventional warfare, some estimates suggest that as much as 75 or 80% of American casualties were directly caused by Iranian-made roadside bombs. These sophisticated improvised explosive devices, which once crippled armored columns, are now appearing again on the supply routes of United States forces, proving that the technical expertise of the Iranian Revolutionary Guard has only grown more lethal and efficient over time. This historical context is being conveniently ignored by the loudest cheerleaders of the current invasion. Figures like Senator Lindsey Graham appeared on national television promising that the United States will blow the hell out of the enemy within the next 14 days. This rhetoric of total destruction is not just inflammatory. It is a clear admission that the initial strategy of a surgical strike has failed, replaced by a desperate campaign of mass attrition. The return of these dreaded war figures from the past suggests a fundamental lack of fresh strategic thinking within the current military establishment. They are attempting to apply a 20-year-old playbook to a world that has evolved into the era of hypersonic missiles and decentralized drone swarms. While the administration continues to broadcast promises of a quick and decisive victory, the reality on the ground is a grinding high-tech nightmare that is draining the national treasury at an unprecedented rate. The calculation that the Iranian leadership would fold under the weight of a 50-second lightning strike has proven to be the most expensive and dangerous mistake in modern military history. The failure of the Iron Dome and the subsequent hypersonic breakthrough have effectively rewritten the rules of global engagement. For decades, the concept of a tactical shield allowed Western powers to operate with a degree of impunity in the Middle East. Knowing that any retaliation could be neutralized mid-air, that era ended at 3 o'clock this morning. As the munitions factories in the United States struggled to ramp up production of interceptors that take months to build, The adversary has proven they can manufacture thousands of drones and missiles in a fraction of that time. This is the industrial reality of 2026. The high-tech, expensive defense is being bankrupted by the low-cost, high-volume offense. Beyond the immediate battlefield, the geopolitical tectonic plates are shifting. Russia and China are observing this conflict with intense scrutiny, noting how quickly a premier Western defense network was overwhelmed. The precedent set here will influence strategic planning from the Taiwan Strait to the borders of Eastern Europe. As the myth of technological invincibility has been shattered on the world stage, economically, the world is entering uncharted territory. With the Strait of Hormuz now a high-risk combat zone, 30% of the world's seaborne oil is effectively held hostage by the threat of further hypersonic strikes. Global stock markets have plummeted, and the price of crude oil is projected to reach $200 per barrel. If a ceasefire is not reached within the next 72 hours, this is no longer just a war between two nations. It is a global economic earthquake. The American public, already weary from decades of overseas intervention, is now facing the reality of a conflict that hits their wallets and their sense of security simultaneously. The promises of a quick, surgical strike have been replaced by the grim prospect of a multi-year commitment that the national debt can ill afford. Experts warn that the total cost of this campaign could exceed $4 trillion, a figure that would cripple domestic social programs and infrastructure projects for a generation. In the final analysis, the 5-hour hypersonic barrage was not just a military operation. It was a loud, violent announcement that the unipolar moment of global security is over. The empty silos of the Iron Dome stand as a silent monument to the limits of technological superiority when faced with determined, unconventional mass. As the sun rises over a scarred and smoke-filled landscape, the leaders in Washington and Tel Aviv must confront a terrifying truth. The shield is broken. The enemy is emboldened, and the path forward leads into a darkness that no one was prepared for. The world is no longer waiting for the war to start. It is struggling to survive the one that has already begun, marking the definitive end of an era and the chaotic birth of a new, unpredictable global order.